All right, I hope everybody's been enjoying NOTSTOCK so far. Can we get a yeah? Have you made a print? Yeah. Have you made some shirts? All right, cool. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Before we get this ball rolling with Tyler, I got some entities and people that we need to thank that help fund and support this amazing event. First, we'd like to thank the many MSU departments, faculty, staff, students who all make this possible. None of it would happen without their dedication to the arts, Minot State, and our community. We'd also like to thank the following for their generous support of NOTSTOCK: the Hampton Inn, Vendor Electric Cooperative, the Northwest Arts Center, Flat Tail Press, Speedball Art, because they send us ink, and ink makes the world go round. Finally, a special thank you goes out to everybody here in this room with us today. This year, our potstock guest, NOTSTOCK guest, for ceramics is Tyler Loeffler. Let's give it up for Tyler. So, Tyler is a 2017 Minot State alumni who after graduation moved back to Alberta, Canada, where he works as an instructor and potter in Edmonton. His practice currently explores functional work along with social and political connections of physical and perceived space. So Tyler's really excited to be back here where his artistic journey began all this time ago and to be a part of NOTSTOCK. So if you want to catch Tyler after his talk, we're going to head back over to Pioneer where potstock is happening. So his work is also on display at the Northwest Arts Center in our inner gallery, and that's all for sale too. So if you want to take a piece of Tyler's home, you can do that. So let's give him a welcome, and we'll hear what he has to say.
That's your cue for more clapping. All right, there we go. Well, thank you very much. It's much appreciated, and I'm very happy and grateful to be here. Just a little preamble before the talk. This is kind of going to be like a chronological recounting of my, I guess you would say, artistic focused journey up until this point. Kind of like the places I've worked, the projects I've explored. We'll kind of start in undergrad here because this is where it all began for me as far as my artistic journey. So we'll start out with just some family background, and then we'll get into the art. And just so you know, if you have any questions at any time, just shoot your hand up and feel free to interrupt me, because sometimes I can gloss over things, or I can omit important details, or details that might be important to you that I don't think are important. So feel free to interrupt at any point by just raising your hand, and I'll try and get to you as soon as possible. So without further ado, this is me. I'm a little quirky. I'm a little weird. I like my dog. I like my dishes. Dudes are all right, I guess, too, you know. Anyways, moving on. So starting at the beginning, this is Napoleon Dynamite, aka my papa. So yeah, that's the genetic starting, Micah. It really is. This is him in university, all buck teeth and froed out. He was raised on a farm. My mother also came from a rural community. That is a baby deer they raised for a couple years before releasing it back in the wild. They found it forlorn. Its mother might have been killed during hunting season, so they took it under their wing. It ate the Christmas tree. It did all sorts of fun stuff, wrecked some things in the house, all that stuff. The guy in the jockstrap and helmet is me. The fabulous little dude in the hamper is my brother. We're pretty close. We're only 2 years apart. Played lots of hockey together, up to all sorts of shenanigans. He also lives in Alberta, where I live at the moment. We've always had dogs in my family. When I was with my parents, we always had Finnish Spitz. This was their last Finnish Spitz. His name was Kippersoff. Really, really fun little guy. Super friendly. Anyways, moving on. So, to the Dakotas. I actually graduated from Minot High here in town, and that's because my dad was a petroleum engineer. So, moving down here was just a natural cause of following his work around. So after graduating, I was a little undecided with what I wanted to do. So I went to Minot State. I continued playing hockey here while exploring, the more hands-on programs like the arts specifically. Originally, I would go into graphic design, and then eventually the flat-tail press logo you see was a collaboration between myself and another student. And it was an absolute pleasure to brand that and do that. So you'll see those stickers around, and for the students that are here, that is the press that is here. That was a lot of fun when they were setting that up. I dabbled in photography, all sorts of strange stuff. I was a bit of a lost student for the first couple of years of my journey before finding my way. I even became a wedding photographer for a time. There's just all sorts of weddings, all sorts of stuff. There's nothing more North Dakota than a shotgun wedding. I'll never forget the first time like a wedding couple will request you like, can we take photos with our guns? And I'm like, sure, it's your wedding. Of course you can. Dabbled in printmaking, drawing, illustration. It was just really all over the board here. I couldn't wait to create things. Though I'm sure if you'll talk to some of the professors, in my earlier years, I was kind of a problematic student in the sense that I would just kind of do what I wanted a little bit. And some sterner guidance was needed here and there. Here's some more printmaking work. If you've seen the Darth Vader, the little mascot that parades around here, the original iteration is this large, intimidating board that was later converted into Darth Vader. So if you've ever ridden the elevator with him or seen him in the hallway, that's my weird dude kicking around. I'm so happy I found him. I'm so happy he's still here. It's so weird. Because he's got his Mardi Gras beads, he's ready to party. Like, look at him go. So things started to change for me, specifically when I started as a work-study student under Linda. And Linda's in the front row here. But I was doing background cataloging work in the studio, organizing molds, cataloging Wimmis sheets. We put some shows together, and then we also cataloged rock art and stuff. And then she's like, you should take a ceramics class, like I think you'd be good at it, you'd have the skills and all this stuff. And I was really hesitant because I wasn't so sure. And of course, 3 years into university, I found out that I really like ceramics and I had to go switch my major. So yay me. But here's the early nascent beginnings of exploring with pots and glazes and all that stuff. I had a great time with it. There was a good cohort of students there. There's a man by the name of Ben Wilson. He's still in town. He throws some pots occasionally. He was a big influence on me in keeping me in the studio. We'd make our own clay bodies to do weird effects. This is called avara. So you would actually ferment milk and flour together for a bit. This is a older Hungarian traditional style of sealing your pots before glazes. So you'd fire your pot till it's red hot, and then you dip it in the fermented milk and wheat, and then you would pull it out, and you get this kind of wonderful multi-textured effect upon it. Super fun. Here's some of that rock art we were recording in Wyoming. We'd literally go back to old sites and catalog any damage or effects or how the sites were doing, and then we'd go and record how it was changing. So we'd literally sit there, pull up a lawn chair and make drawings of these old glyphs up in the hills and stuff of Wyoming. It was a really lovely time being out there. So these pots are not mine, just to make that clear. The Greek pot you see on the right is by Antimenes, a Greek potter, I want to say 500 BCE, something around there. And the pot on the left is a Chinese pot that uses an effect where the potter would actually spit the darker kind of stain on top of it to give a robin's egg effect. Oh, I have a timer. Look at that. This is also a Chinese pot that has a glaze called a celadon. Celadon uses iron as a colorant in a transparent glaze, and if you fire it in specific ways, you can get different colored effects. So you can get anywhere from blues to greens to deep browns and stuff like that. But these three kind of works for me are really kind of cornerstones in how I wanted to approach this next stage of me making pots. So I started referencing those forms, those hard cuts. This obviously isn't blue, but it's green, but the shape is definitely derivative of the Chinese pot that you previously saw. This is working more in functional wear. This is all still in undergrad here at Minot State. Experimenting more with this lovely Oribe glaze. Oribe glaze originates from Japan, and it's a copper-based glaze. So when you fire it in oxidation, it will go green. If you fire it in reduction, it will go red in spots. You can also then etch it in ferric acid wash a little bit to deepen up how it appears. Fun stuff. Here's some more iteration, kind of going back to that blue celadon we were talking about previously. Anyways, as my undergrad was coming up to a close for my thesis project, for my BFA here, I decided to build a kiln. And this kiln was all sourced from like materials people didn't want. There was a potter out by Burlington, Susan Davies, who donated the bricks. And those bricks were previously donated to her from an incinerator out in Minneapolis. And I would repurpose a cement pad over in the over in the trash pile by up on the hill by the theater, by the summer theater. Across from it, if you were to look where all the junk pile is, that's where Minot State deemed it was okay to go burn stuff far enough away from people and from prying eyes. So this ended up being the kiln. I think it stood for a year or two. I only fired it once before I left. I never got to work out the kinks, but I wrote a little paper, got some pots we had to refire. Some things turned out good, some things turned out bad. It's all a learning experience. I later learned from Linda that it later became a house for someone for a couple of years. So on the bright side, you know, shelter for the homeless. Yay! And then it was knocked down, either by the person in question who was living in it, or by someone else. The mystery continues. Anyways, here's a pot from one of the firings that was refired. The green is a copper glaze that is dripping down the pot, and then the red is actually wood ash that has deposited in the white glaze. So going back to this kiln, this is a wood-fired kiln, and you'd put the wood in the initial chamber, it would fire out, and you bring it up to a couple thousand degrees over time. But wrapping up, I wanted to continue my work. I needed to find a place where I could continue to grow as an artist and as a maker. And so I started applying for what are called artisan residencies. Residency programs range anywhere you can go for a couple months or you can go for a year. I applied for one specifically back in Canada, where I was born, in Alberta, called Minot Potteries. And it's located in Medicine Hat. It's 6-7 hours away from here, just south of Calgary on Highway 1 in there. And it is located in an old industrial district within the city that has a long history of making pots. In Medicine Hat, they would actually blow up the hillsides and the cliffs with dynamite because the clay is good enough that they could just load it straight onto train cars and bring it to the potteries to make production work. Back in the 1910s all the way to the 60s, they would primarily make crocks. So if you're making sauerkraut or kimchi or anything like that, this is what they would be made in back in the day. This was used for preserving pickles and stuff as well. And they make anything from little half-gallon crocks to big 25-gallon crocks. Sorry, I'll go back to this. And they'd all do it through what's called jiggering. Jiggering is a process where you have a mold, but you also have like an armature type machine that goes deep into it and then forces or extrudes your clay piece until it makes its form. And so here's an example of all the different sizes they do, listed in imperial gallons. They have these old style beehive kilns that they used to fire them in. A really great place to be. So I work more on the fine art side of things. Oh, so here's some more production work that they would do. Pictures from some books of them assembling them in the factories back in the days. So here's a picture of inside one of the beehive kilns. And these are massive. You can host like dinner parties in them. They could fire 10,000 piees of ceramics. So you could supply a small town with this. And they used to supply most of Western Canada and most of Northern Canada with all their ceramic supplies and stuff like that. But of course, all that clay needs a place where you can mix them. And then on the right, you see one of the old style mixers, a big blunger. And these things are huge. And I can't understate just how big they are. You could have tons and tons of clay in them. This was my artist cohort that I was in. I was there for a whole year before I would move on to grad school. Starting from the left to the right, we have Kristen, myself, Tyler, Olivia, Lauren, and then Carlos Rojas. Great work from all of them. Anything from really functional, normal stuff you'd see on the table to really wild, like sculptures. One of them, Olivia in particular, she would make gigantic sculptures of organs of different animals. Her master's thesis was actually making giant-sized bones. So if you'd ever want to see a foot at 10 times your scale, it's actually quite terrifying how big that is. And so she'd willingly do that. Had a ton of fun with them. Going back to the blunger, there's a friend, Curtis, while we were working in one of the factories cleaning it up. Ooh, excuse me. Standing beside one. So you definitely wouldn't want to fall into one as a turning mincemeat. Moving on to the next thing. Part of my job while I was at Medalta, besides exploring my own work, was helping to maintain the massive amount of grounds they had. So they have 141 acres of just buildings that they maintain. Most of it isn't accessible to the public, but one is an old brick factory, one is an old porcelain factory, and this is a picture of what's called a train kiln. So what you do on one side is you load it in, and slowly over time, this train would move inches an hour until it comes out the other side a couple days later, with it being the hottest in the middle and the coolest on the outsides. And these things stretch a couple hundred meters, and that way they would never stop firing them. They would just be on permanently. They'd load up the front and they'd keep it going continuously forever. While I was there, I'd also teach classes. Part of my job now is I teach classes to little ones, I instruct adults, I also do production throwing. We'll get more into that. Here's some of the work I was exploring at Medalta, kind of returning to the blue, so to speak. Going through exploring textures, shapes. I would make my own tools out of clay, just to experiment with it, sand them down, make them nice. Here's another just little cup set. Eventually we'd get onto more complex forms, working on referencing even architectural things like pagodas and stuff like that, but still always hearkening back to those kind of like the antimonies, painter pot, and the one Chinese Chinese pot. Eventually, I became interested in exploring, how to put it, kind of memory as we're traveling. So I came across this series where I'd make these plates, and I would transfer these signs using what's called underglaze. Underglaze is essentially a colored slip. A slip is just clay in watered down form, and apply these to the pots. And it was all about how you're driving along, and you kind of remember your journey or the places you've been, but it's fragmented, it's cut up, everything is kind of a blur. And so these were all arranged side by side as you'd pass the road signs along the way. So that's also why I was like breaking the edges off the plates, kind of referencing that fragmentation, the breaking down of, you know, your memory as time goes on, things of that nature. Here's some other pots I went along. At the end of your residency at Minot, they ask for a show. They have a gallery there, and you set your show up, and you get to sell your work, you get to show. It's this kind of like big event where you celebrate your, you know, surviving 1 year on your own, being, you know, an artist exploring your practice here. Here's an example of the wall with all the plates set up. Some lovely lady from a far off province was nice enough to buy most of them, and they're set up in her living room somewhere. So it's nice to think that they've found a home and they're being appreciated. But this was all kind of preparing to move me into grad school, which was something I really wanted to do at the time, something I really wanted to pursue. And so moving into grad school, I kind of wanted to continue and talk about, you know, memory and fragmentation. So this originally started with just working on normal pots, trying to get, you know, some form of a cohesive story out of them. So they were moving on to painting these pots with kind of weird stories. My family has this weird story of how my father and his brother were taking care of rats on their farm one day, and while they were doing that and cleaning the silos, they accidentally lit the field on fire by accidentally lighting one of the rats on fire, because they were heating up underneath the silo after they emptied it in order to get the rats out. And then all of a sudden, flaming rats started shooting out from underneath the silo. And then, of course, they're running back to the house. Dad, it's on fire. And so there's these two boys and this German immigrant running around with shovels, whacking rats in the field while also putting out the fire. Just the most comical, the most Saskatchewan thing you've ever seen. Now, part of grad school, for those that don't know, in an artistic sense, is eventually you settle on a committee. This committee then oversees the work you're doing, both in your research and in your physical practice as far as art goes. And they're there to keep tabs on you, they're there to give you advice. But the end-all be-all of this work is that none of the stories were really coming to fruition properly, because the vessel was being treated too formally. And so, kind of going back to the fragments and talking about road signs and stuff, we then started coming up with different things. And that's where these kind of fragmented pots come into place. All this was about actually one specific locale of me growing up, but it's about cutting that up into almost little micro stories. Like if you were to cut up a comic book and just slap it into pieces while still referencing a pot, so to speak. So that's the idea behind it. Ended up being decently successful at that. But it was incredibly laborious making this by hand. I didn't have a way to prototype that yet and move on to making them super quicker. So I kind of moved on to working in different materials, where I'd start making these cardboard maquettes that still reference vessels. There still could be pots, but how do I cut that up? How do I make it interesting? How do I disturb it visually? And it kind of ended up going almost backwards in time, where there's people like the futurists, or if you'd even think of like Picasso and things like that, how they would cut up imagery and fragment the way they would talk about their paintings and their images. Here's some more references, and then here's one with getting like images on it and tying in words and stuff. Words can be tricky when you put them on them, because as people, we're taught to read immediately, and they can draw a lot of attention to themselves beyond images and stuff like that. So trying to tell stories. It eventually led into full-on cardboard maquette construction, and like some of these are rather large, doing just rather kind of weird and wild stuff. Circling back to the committee thing, they, despite me producing a bunch of work and all this breadth of things, they still didn't feel that anything was really mature enough, and they weren't happy, and they were constantly asking me to pivot. And this is one of the mistakes I made in grad school, that if you're an artist in this room, I would hearken you against. I decided, like, at any point if there's conflict within your committee, there's usually mechanisms built in where you can switch out members, so you can get something that's more supportive or something that's more conducive to what you're trying to make. The problem I did was when people started telling me this was bad, this was no, or like the critiques were going very poorly, instead of switching them, I just tried to convince them it was good. I just kind of dug in my heels, and instead of getting people that were supportive of what I wanted to do, I had people that really didn't like anything I was doing. And that's not helpful for you as an artist and a maker, and that's neither helpful to the faculty. You just both end up wasting each other's times. So if you're ever in a situation like that, and this can maybe apply to greater and broader life, surround yourself with people that want to be around you and want to be around your work, rather than people that you think you want, so to speak. Anyways, going down the grad school path, things are getting weirder. We're working in concrete. We're kind of far from pots and away from what we originally intended to be doing, or what I originally intended to be doing, I should say. It eventually led to these mock-ups and making these large concrete panels. I wanted to talk about how a house could represent a person, a place. How can one house or one person symbolically represent, that house as a whole, and how can that house as a whole represent its community? Because at the base, if we're thinking about this like Lego blocks, like many houses make up a community, eventually patterns emerge, and you start to see greater things. Anyways, eventually, of course, in the middle of my program, COVID happened. And it kind of ended up being this great pausing point for me to shift what I wanted to do. So grad school for me is currently incomplete. It's halfway done. I could transfer to a different program and keep going, but it's not finished. And so it became about returning to, what originally started this whole journey, like what I wanted to do, because I fell in love with making pots. I fell in love with making things people could use and stuff, as opposed to talking about really abstract ideas. So during the time when COVID happened, a lot of pottery places and instructor jobs kind of went away, because the whole touching clay, touching people, there's a whole lot of touching going on, and that goes on in pottery, just wasn't allowed. And so kind of shifted the goals. So during my time when I didn't have a steady pottery job, I refurbished furniture. So fixed things up, sold it to people, made my own furniture, made sure people were getting things they liked, just keeping busy, doing all that fun stuff. Eventually saved up enough that my partner, Allison, and we bought a house, and this is our current dog, Leela. She's a one-eyed cyclops. She's an absolute gem, a little bit of a monster, but love her to death. This is when we got her. Got her directly from a rescue place, and they think another dog bit her eye out. But she doesn't mind. She doesn't care at all. She wasn't even sad about the cone. We got her in the middle of winter. She'd use the cone to pick up snow and just flip it at you. And she'd be like, blah. And she'd just bash you with it, and she'd just be happy to be there. Anyway, she's all grown up now, nice and strong, super fast. She has no respect for her body. She'll jump off cliffs just for fun. Just an absolute psycho. But eventually, things from COVID started to open up. And luckily enough, one job became two jobs actually became three. So this is one of the places I instruct at. It's called The Shop. I teach adult classes here. I make pots out of here. It's a really nice space. It's more expanded than this. We're up to 14 wheels. We got kilns in the back, all sorts of stuff. And now the two other places I work, the one picture on the right is an artist I work for. I make production work for her. So she'll show me forms she wants. I'll throw them for her. I'll trim them for her. I'll get them all ready. And then she will decorate them and list them and sell them. And then the place on the left is a city-funded place called the City Arts Center. And I'll teach children's camps and classes out of there. So anything from making making trays to making weird animals. The kids one day asked for a bird dog cat. So this is my interpretation of a bird dog cat. And we get to decorate them, we go through all sorts of building techniques, kind of building up, you know, that physical intelligence of working with clay and making it fun and engaging for them. But I'm finally back at a place where kind of return to the whole beginning, where I get to make pots and stuff again. And sell that, make my own work, teach people how to do it. You can see some of my work in the gallery, over at the Northwest Arts Center. Feel free to pick it up. It's all meant to be touched. It's all meant to be handled. It's not meant to just sit on a shelf and look pretty. It's meant to be used and engaged with. And anyways, now I'm in here. It's been a rather whirlwind since I graduated in 2017. There's been a lot of moves, a lot of life changes. But finally getting back to a place, being stable, making pots, and having a good time doing it. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, in the back. What's the future? Well, right now, one of the guys I work for is actually in talks about building a new studio. So a joint studio space and an expanding business potentially. And they're just talks right now, but ideally I'd run my own studio, I'd teach my own classes, have my own little fiefdom, so to speak, if that makes sense. But yeah, yes.
How old is your rescue dog?
She's 2 years old now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's about to turn 2 pretty soon.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, my nephew turned 2 last Saturday.
Oh, very nice.
He was very crabby.
Yes. Oh, how do you start? Well, you need to be in a place that has the facilities. So I was lucky enough that I was going to Minot State, and they have an art program here. But you would need to pick like a university or be in a place that either had a pottery or a painter's place or even a printmaking facility that you could then move into and start making your own work.